Andrew Jackson, Old Hickory. That's what we'll talk about in today's video. One of the most important presidents of the United States, and one of the ones who has received the least attention, and lately some derision, which he really does not deserve. The key role that Jackson played in the United States was to convert us from a republic to a democracy. When Jackson came in, most presidential races were decided by the state legislatures. They didn't even ask the voters. And the people that voted for the state legislators usually had a property requirement in voting. The idea was that anyone who had property was invested in the country, and anyone that didn't could be swayed by being paid off by one side or the other. And that was ridiculous. And Jackson insisted on universal suffrage. In the last video we had, universal white male suffrage. In our last week's video, we talked about the election of 1824, where the political establishment ganged up on Jackson. And even though he outpolled Adams, John Quincy Adams, by 10 points in the popular vote, they still elected Adams president. And that sparked a revolution throughout the country, particularly when Adams turned around and named Henry Clay, the Speaker of the House, who delivered the votes to him, to be his Secretary of State. The phrase corrupt bargain came to be. And from that, Andrew Jackson emerged as the leading presidential candidate of 1828. He didn't trust the congressional caucus of Democratic congressmen to nominate him. He knew they were in the tank for the establishment. So he bypassed them, and he called the first ever convention of a political party. And that really was the first Democratic National Convention. And increasingly the name Republican got shunted aside, and what Jefferson had set up as the Democratic Republican Party became the Democratic Party. And Jackson really represented the coming of age of the West in the United States, and the increasing emphasis on democracy as opposed to trusting the Eastern establishment and the rich people to run the country. Jackson, of course, was very famous from the Battle of New Orleans, which was an incredible battle with a relatively small force. He defeated one of the best armies in the British Empire, and one of the generals who had just defeated Napoleon at Waterloo. And they mowed the British down, and there were very few American casualties. So on the strength of that, he was elected president. Now, in his first term, the big issue was that he passed a tariff on imported goods that was too high for the taste of the Southerners, because after all, they made their living selling cotton to Britain and then importing goods that they needed, manufactured goods and other stuff. And the tariff forced them to buy more expensive products from the North rather than cheaper products that could come over from Britain. And John C. Calhoun, who was vice president at the time, announced that he was going to lead South Carolina, his home state, in nullifying the tariff, the doctrine of nullification, that any state could nullify the act of the federal government. They got that from Thomas Jefferson, who had urged nullification of the Alien and Sedition Acts that squelched free speech during the first Adams administration. And the question was, what would Jackson do? As a Westerner, he probably opposed tariffs, and he had carried the South heavily in his race. And there was a dinner, and John C. Calhoun stood up and toasted "Our liberty most dear." And Jackson got up and said, "Liberty and union, the federal government, it must," no, I'm sorry, I'm getting it wrong. "The federal union, it must be preserved." And that toast really set him in opposition to the Southern initiative. And he made very clear that he was prepared to enforce the tariff with the U.S. Army, and they faced down South Carolina and averted a civil war. In the next video, we'll talk about his second term. That was probably the most influential four-year period, certainly until Lincoln came in, because it defined the whole idea of economic populism for the first time in American history, or really in world history. Thanks for watching.